Let's get right into it. Number 10. Deadline. Back in the Civil War, deadlines actually killed people. In prison camps, a deadline was a physical line marked by stakes, ropes, or a wooden rail about 20 feet inside the prison walls. If a prisoner crossed this line, even by accident, the guards would shoot them dead on the spot. No warnings, no second chances. The most infamous deadline was at Andersonville Prison in Georgia. Built to hold 10,000 prisoners, it ended up cramming in over 32,000. The deadline there was particularly cruel because the only clean water source in the prison was a stream that ran right along it. Imagine being a prisoner, dying of thirst in the Georgia heat. The clean water is right there, just a few feet away, but if you reach too far to fill your cup, you're dead. Guards would sometimes throw pieces of bread just beyond the deadline. They'd watch as starving prisoners debated whether dying of hunger was worse than getting shot. Some prisoners would actually volunteer to cross the deadline, seeing it as a quicker way out compared to slowly starving or dying from disease. The term stuck around after the war and started being used by newspapers in the 1920s. They called the time by which a story needed to be finished the deadline, because missing it meant your story was dead and wouldn't make it into the paper. Number 9. Bite the bullet. Picture this. You're a soldier in the Civil War, and you've just taken a musket ball to the leg. The field surgeon takes one look and says, "Yeah, that leg's gotta go." But there's no anesthesia, no morphine, not even a shot of whiskey. Instead, they hand you a bullet and say, "Here, bite down on this." Soldiers would clench their teeth around a bullet while the surgeon sawed through bone and muscle. The bullet was soft enough not to crack their teeth, but hard enough to bite down on during the excruciating pain. Some soldiers bit down so hard, they left teeth marks in the bullets. These bullets have been found on old battlefields, complete with human tooth marks preserved in the lead. Imagine being so desperate to handle the pain that you leave permanent marks in metal with your teeth. Today we use the phrase casually, like, bite the bullet and do your taxes. But at least you're not in a Civil War medical tent watching a surgeon sharpen his saw. Number 8. Basket case. You've probably called someone a basket case before, but this phrase has a much darker origin than you might think. It comes from World War I. Back then, a basket case meant something very specific, a soldier who had lost all 4 limbs in battle. The story goes that these severely wounded soldiers had to be carried around in baskets. The U.S. military actually had to release an official statement in 1919 saying there were no basket cases. The Surgeon General himself came out and said there were no soldiers who had lost all their limbs. Their denial makes sense when you think about it. Imagine trying to boost wartime morale while people are spreading stories about soldiers being carried around like picnic supplies. But by then, the phrase had already taken root. We went from soldier so badly wounded they need to be carried in a basket to Sarah from accounting is being such a basket case about the missing staplers. The phrase stuck around, but its meaning shifted from physical trauma to mental state. Number 7. Shell shock. The term shell shock comes from World War I, where soldiers were exposed to constant artillery bombardment. Imagine being in a trench, and every single day, massive explosions are going off around you. The ground shakes, your ears ring, and you can't tell if the next shell has your name on it. At first, doctors thought these explosions were physically damaging soldiers' brains. They believed the shock waves from the shells were literally rattling their heads. Soldiers would freeze up completely, unable to move or speak. Some would shake uncontrollably, while others would just stare into space with what became known as the 1,000-yard stare. But soldiers who were nowhere near explosions started showing the same symptoms. That's when doctors realized these men weren't just physically injured. Their minds were breaking under the constant stress of war. Some soldiers became completely mute. Others developed such severe tremors they couldn't hold a cup of water. Military leaders thought these men were just cowards. They'd force shell-shocked soldiers back into battle. Some were even executed for cowardice. Today, we know shell shock was actually what we now call PTSD, but back then, they had no idea what to do with these broken men. Some doctors tried to cure them with electric shocks. Number 6. Mad as a hatter. Back in the 1800s, hat makers used mercury to turn animal fur into felt for fancy hats. They'd dip their bare hands into this toxic stuff every single day. The mercury would seep through their skin and eventually reach their brains. First, their hands would start to shake uncontrollably. Then they'd start slurring their words like they were drunk. Soon they'd start having hallucinations, violent mood swings, and complete mental breakdowns. In some hat-making towns like Danbury, Connecticut, these symptoms were so common they had their own name, the Danbury Shakes. Imagine walking down the street and seeing your local hat maker talking to invisible people or having a full-on argument with a lamppost. These guys had no idea what was happening to them. They just thought going crazy was part of the job description. Scientists didn't figure out it was mercury poisoning until the 1940s. By then, generations of hatters had already lost their minds. Number 5. Give short shrift. Back in medieval times, this common phrase had a terrifying meaning. Picture this. You're a prisoner about to be executed. Before they chop your head off, they give you a chance to confess your sins to a priest. That's the shrift part. It comes from an old word meaning to hear confession. But if the executioner was feeling impatient, you'd get short shrift. The priest would speed run through your confession like he was trying to break a world record. The whole thing could take less than a minute. You had to get your soul ready for the afterlife in the same amount of time it takes to microwave a hot pocket. The phrase appears in Shakespeare's Richard III, where a character is literally told he's getting short shrift before his execution. These days, when someone gives you short shrift, they're just not paying attention to you, but at least they're not rushing through your last confession before chopping your head off. Number 4. Hold their feet to the fire. Back in the day, holding feet to the fire wasn't just a figure of speech. It was an actual torture method used to extract confessions. The victim's feet would be secured in stocks, and torturers would slowly move hot coals closer and closer to their feet. Some even used specialized chairs with built-in footstocks and a movable tray of burning coals underneath. It was like a medieval George Foreman grill, but instead of making paninis, it was making people confess to crimes. The feet were chosen specifically because they're incredibly sensitive with tons of nerve endings. It was also a form of torture that wouldn't kill quickly, giving torturers plenty of time to work. The method was so effective that people would confess to almost anything. You could get someone to admit they were secretly a unicorn after a few minutes of this treatment. Today, when someone says they're going to hold your feet to the fire, they just mean they're going to pressure you to get something done. At least modern performance reviews don't involve actual fire. Number 3. Caught red-handed. Picture yourself in 15th century Scotland. You're walking through a village when you hear screaming coming from a nearby farm. The farmer's prized sheep is missing, and there's a trail of blood leading into the woods. You follow it and find a guy with blood all over his hands, trying to butcher the stolen animal. That's where the phrase caught red-handed comes from, literally having red hands from killing someone else's livestock. Back then, if you were found with your hands still stained, your fate was sealed. No fancy lawyers, no excuses. The red hands were all the evidence they needed to drag you straight to the gallows. The phrase was so common in Scottish law that they actually wrote it into their legal documents. It was like CSI, medieval edition, but with way worse hygiene. Over time, the phrase stuck around, but we started using it for any situation where someone's caught in the act, which is fortunate, because if we still took it literally, every surgeon and butcher in the world would be in serious trouble. Number 2. The third degree. When someone gives you the third degree, they're asking too many questions. But this phrase comes from something far more sinister. Back in the early 1900s, police had horrifying ways of making suspects talk. The first degree was simple questioning. The second degree involved psychological tricks and threats. But the third degree was pure torture. Cops would burn suspects with cigars, beat them with rubber hoses that didn't leave marks, or force them to sit in chairs for days without sleep. Police stations had special sweat boxes, small hot rooms where they'd keep suspects until they confessed. One of their favorite methods was the bright light treatment. They'd shine a powerful lamp in the suspect's face for hours. Many suspects went permanently blind. The term originated from Freemasonry, where getting your third degree meant going through an intense ritual. The police took this ceremonial term and transformed it into systematic torture. By 1931, a government report revealed almost every major police department in America regularly used third-degree tactics. Number 1. Pleased as Punch. Punch wasn't some happy-go-lucky guy who just loved life. He was actually a puppet character from the 1600s who went around murdering people and cackling about it. Think of him as the Joker of puppet shows. Imagine if your local playground puppet show featured a main character who beats his wife to death, throws his baby out a window, and then dances around singing about it. That's literally what Punch did in these shows. And people brought their kids to watch this. It was basically the medieval version of letting your toddler watch Saw. Punch would get super excited and pleased with himself after each horrible act. So when someone says they're pleased as Punch, they're technically comparing themselves to a psychotic puppet who just committed murder. It's like saying, I'm as happy as Hannibal Lecter at a dinner party. But over the years, We completely forgot about the whole violent puppet murderer part. Now it's just something your grandma says when she wins at bingo. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.